Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be giving an intro to GraphQL. I'll go over some key concepts, give an analogy so you can understand those concepts, then show a demo of what GraphQL looks like in practice. So to start off with, what is GraphQL? Well, here is the answer straight from the GraphQL website. GraphQL is a query language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling those queries with your existing data. GraphQL provides a complete and understandable description of the data in your API, gives clients the power to ask for exactly what they need and nothing more, makes it easier to evolve APIs over time, and enables powerful developer tools. Okay, but what does that actually mean? I'll get into explaining each part of that in a second, but first we're going to visualize it with an analogy. That's right, this is the Lego Movie API edition. Let's introduce our cast. First, we have the front end, which in this case is a client for a mobile or web application. Next is our big, beefy server and data stores, such as a SQL or NoSQL database. This cart represents HTTP technologies such as requests and responses, which will be carrying our data back and forth. We also have some data entities, which in this case are individual rows from tables in our database. Each of them has their own attributes, some of which the client will want to display to the user. We have an individual student, a course that student is taking, and the professor that is teaching that course. Last of all, we have some magic bricks made of GraphQL goodness. So the first thing that we need to understand is that GraphQL is essentially a substitute technology for REST APIs. So before we look at GraphQL in detail, let's review what a typical REST API looks like. In this case, the client will be using a few HTTP GET requests to get the data from our server. We are using a GetProfessor endpoint, a GetCourse endpoint, and a GetStudent endpoint. As you can see, the client has to send a separate request for each entity from the server. The backend sends the entire object to the front end. Next, the client has to handle taking only the data they need from each object so that it can display the student, their course, and the professor to the end user. We can see from this example that REST APIs introduce some inefficiencies that make the network and the front end work harder than they have to. How does GraphQL address those inefficiencies? Let's take a look. We are going to add a piece of that GraphQL magic to our client, our HTTP request, and our server. When the front end sends the request, it will ask only for the attributes that it wants to display to the end user. The backend already knows what kinds of connections are possible to make between entities, so it can assemble the requested data very quickly and send it on to the front end. GraphQL makes our front-end developers happy. Very happy. Now that the Lego movie is over, let's see what GraphQL actually looks like in practice. As a reminder, here are the key benefits that GraphQL offers. I said I would get back to these later, and this demo should cover most of these concepts. First, GraphQL provides a complete and understandable description of your data. Second, it gives clients the power to ask for exactly what they need and nothing more. Third, it makes it easier to evolve APIs over time. And fourth, it enables powerful developer tools. So let's see how GraphQL accomplishes these things. You can see we're using Apollo server here, which is just a popular open source implementation of some GraphQL protocols, and then the actual GraphQL code. So here at the bottom, we're just instantiating our server here, and then having it listen on a specific URL and port, which will just be on our local machine for now. And next we have our data, which is all up here. And in a larger project, you'd probably have this, it would be a SQL or NoSQL database, or a CRM platform, or even some third-party APIs. GraphQL abstracts that away when you're actually consuming the data. But in this case, we just have hard-coded two arrays with some objects inside. We have libraries and books. Libraries have a branch, it's just a location, and books have a title, an author, and a branch where the book is in stock. Next, then we define our GraphQL schema. And this is where we clearly define what data is available for consumption by the client. So we define our libraries and our books as before, and we also define a type for the book's author. Last, we have this special query type. So in GraphQL, you can perform queries and mutations. Queries are for retrieving the data, and mutations are for creating or modifying the data in some way. So this query type is just defining what types of queries we can perform on our client, but you'll see in a minute that this isn't inflexible like a REST API would be. And then last of all, we have our resolvers, which just allow us to map our data structure to our schema. You can also perform whatever business logic you need to in the resolver, but for this example, it's simply returning the data that we ask for with each query. So just returning the library for libraries, books with books, etc. So we mentioned something about some great developer tools, and this is one example called the GraphQL Playground. It is automatically created in your GraphQL project, and it allows both front-end and back-end developers to see what the schema looks like, what data they have access to, and test queries and mutations. So on this left pane, you can write your queries and your mutations, and on the right pane, you'll see the JSON responses. You can also open this extra pane to see the structure of your schema. So that's a really big advantage as you're testing things out as a front-end developer. You want to see what kind of data is available. So I already have a really simple query written here that is just asking for the branch property from all of our libraries. So let's see what the response looks like. So as you can see, it just responds with a JSON object that contains exactly what we asked for. It's an array of libraries, or an array that lists all the locations of the branches for each library. But that is a really simple query. So let's see what else we can do. So let's say we want to see all the books that are in stock at those libraries. And because we've already described our data and how these entities relate to each other in our GraphQL schema and our resolvers, we can do some pretty cool things with a GraphQL query. So I'm going to write a new query that's called getBooks. And so use the same libraries query for now, but we're just going to get a few more details. Branches before, but then we're also going to just attach on the books here. I want to see the title of every book. You can see that GraphQL is also providing these nice little hints. It takes that directly from our schema and tells us exactly what we can include on each query or mutation. So let's see what the response looks like there. So let's call our get books query. And you can see that it returns the branch as it did before, but for each branch, it also shows the title of each book that's available at that location. So the fact that we can ask for exactly what data we want to, nothing less and nothing more, is a really big advantage. Because you can see we're not asking for everything that we've got on the book type. We're not asking for the author yet, but we just want the title. So let's say we did want the author. It's going to be really simple to add that. Say I know who wrote Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, but I have no idea who wrote Jurassic Park. Let's just ask for the author, and because author is its own type, we add a subset of properties there. So let's just get the name of the author. We add that and then run that query one more time. And you can see that it just attaches everything that we ask for to that query. So again, this is a really big advantage if you're doing some front-end development and you want some flexibility with asking for the right amount of data without sending a bunch of requests to your server back and forth. So the last piece that I wanted to demo is how GraphQL improves API versioning. So it's very flexible. So if I decide I want to add a number of pages to each book and make that available to the client, I can do that without creating a new API version. So you can see I've already done it here on the books object. So on my data source, I just added a pages property to each book with an arbitrary number. But then in the schema, the way that I'm going to add that, I'll just go down to the book type, and we're going to add a field here for pages. I'll just make that an int. Something else that I'm going to do, just say for some random reason we had to change the name of a property here. So I'm going to add this directive that says deprecated to the title, and I'm just going to replace it with a different property called book title. So we'll go ahead and save that, and then I'm going to go in and restart this development server so you can see it in our GraphQL playground and refresh that page. Okay, so the first thing that you'll see is there's this warning that comes up that says, hey, title is deprecated and no longer supported. But you'll see that this actually allows us to still run our query and it still gets the title. But then if we just replace that with book title, we'd eventually, as long as we implemented that correctly in the resolver, we'd get that and it would remove that warning. Leave that in there for now, but then we also just want to show you how we can add pages. So we just add that to our getBooks query, and we can execute that one more time, and you'll see that now the number of pages shows up for each book. In summary, GraphQL is a great tool that opens up a lot of new possibilities. If you've been concerned at all about moving away from REST APIs, take a look at this huge list of companies that have started using GraphQL. There are some big names on the list that use GraphQL quite extensively, such as Airbnb, Facebook, Twitter, Atlassian, NBC, and Shopify. We are just scratching the surface of what GraphQL has to offer to developers. If you want to learn more, here are some websites that are great resources. Thanks for watching.